Hey everyone, Urban Fish Keeper here. Today I'm going to take you through a DIY Betta Rack or Betta Barracks. This is the one that I've set up, and the primary purpose that I've used it for is because I wanted to breed some bettas. It was having the option of having a selection of bettas to choose from and being able to observe when I think they're ready for breeding. Before I get started, I first of all want to say a massive thanks to everybody that subscribed. Also, a big thanks for the comments and the feedback. I really appreciate it. It's the feedback and comments that really make it worth sharing some of these videos with you. I also want to give a big shout out to Blake's Aquatics. Blake posted about my channel on one of his groups, so a big thanks to Blake. I really appreciate it, and it's great to see Aussie YouTubers supporting each other. All right, so let's get started. What I'm going to try and do in today's video is really just go through some of the techniques I've used. I will move to the table at a later stage and just show you how I assembled or made some of the the filtration and the equipment and the water supply. Just to quickly run through what this is just an old bookshelf that my wife was going to throw away, and I decided then to convert this into a Betta Barracks. It makes use of a sump filter, which is at the bottom, and I'll show you all of that. In the sump filter there's a return pump, and the pump then pumps it up via the black tubing on the side, and that's regulated with taps to each one of the containers. This one takes 20. I have 5 per row, so I can have up to 20 bettas on this particular rack. The flow back is via the white pipe on the other side, and I'll show you that. And it flows back from containers behind each row. I do have some lights on here as well, but they're probably not needed. But I have put on lights on these shelves as well. Everything that I've used on here is either Bunnings or Kmart. So the containers and little back sections, which I'll show you where the water runs into and then drains off from, that's the containers, and those and the holder at the back that collects the water, that effectively is Kmart. All the fittings and the piping and everything else, that's all Bunnings. The sump, which is a plastic container, that comes from Bunnings as well. And then of course inside there's my filter media, which I'll go through with you, and how I've created the filter, really straightforward. And then the return pump, and I'll talk a little bit about the return pump, because you need to consider things like head height, how high is it pumping. If you have a power failure, will it still push the water up to the top ones, or will it just keep pushing water out at the bottom level? So in essence, that's what it is. Again, I try and keep my piping and fittings the same as what I use on everything else. So if I've got spares, I can use that, and I don't change it. The black piping is just the poly tube, the irrigation piping, 19 mil. And then the white tubing, or the white pipe, which is the water return, is again just the white PVC. I think it's DN15, which is the 15 mil one. It's the same one that I use on the Madden filters. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take off a row of these containers so you can see what it looks like behind, and then I can just explain a little bit more, and I'll bring the camera closer that you can see what the sump looks like and how the piping runs. And on this one, because there's no shelf right at the top for me to connect the pipe to, I've actually made the top section go around and then come down on the side, but I'll show you that in a second. So let me grab the camera off and show you that. All right, so let me just run you through. I'm just going to be behind the camera so I can show you some of the stuff. So as you can see on the top, so everything in all the black piping is the supply piping. So that supplies the water to all the containers. So that's the black poly pipe. That's also the risers that get used, which I'll show later on how I do it. That's got the taps connected to it. As I've said, each shelf has 5 containers, and that water then flows back down to the sump. So what I've done is on this particular row, I've taken out the containers so you can actually see what it looks like. So each container, and I'll go through this at a later stage on the table where I'll show you the design and how I put it together, has got an overflow, and that overflow then runs into, as you can see, this plastic tray at the back. The plastic tray is then connected into the white PVC pipe, and that then flows down all the way down to the sump. Now on each row it has that connection. It has from the plastic tray at the back, each one goes all the way down for each, and then down to the sump. Now at the sump it flows down, sorry for the reflection, and that is the sump over there. And I've got it running at the moment so you can see the flow. The sump is quite straightforward. It's got some media on the right hand side, a piece of sponge across the container, and then the return pump on the left hand side. The other thing about the sump that I really like, that I like to do, let me just pull it out slightly. There we go. Is I like to put in my sump as well just any sponge filters that I need matured in case I need them, and I just drop them in there. Because it's a Betta Rack, it's also great because I can put the heating in here if I require, and I can also add in any almond leaves or anything just to improve the water quality. All right, just to show you how the water, so that you can see where the water flows out the back, and I'll speak about these containers and the size of the holes that I've used, and some of the challenges I've had with it. You have the tap, right, which is connected, and you can then, decide on the water flow you want. You can either have a drip system, or if you really want to, you can have a flowing system. Now the bedders themselves will not be mad about a full flowing system, so ideally you'd run this as a drip system. Something like that. In the case of the bookshelf I'm using, it has got open sides, as you can see. It's not solid. So running the piping has been reasonably straightforward because I haven't had to worry about the other side. What is really key is that you need to make sure that this is level, because if you put any unnecessary strain on this joint here, you'll end up getting some leaks. So this is one of those projects where, measure, test, fit, and once you're happy, only then do you glue everything in place. Now on the white PVC, what I have not glued is the connection of the tray that goes into the T-piece for the water return. And the reason I haven't glued that in is because occasionally I need to remove this particular section, and if I had it glued in, I couldn't do that. So for any maintenance I need to do on this, although I just can lift out the sponge, I haven't glued it in there, and it doesn't leak. The other thing is I run sponge in these trays at the back, and the reason for the sponge, there's probably more than one reason. The primary reason though is that I don't like the splash, because if you don't have a sponge in there, it's got a tendency to splash, and it splashes up against the containers and you get moisture sitting on the wood. The other reason is it improves or increases the filtration, because the bottom section of it is in water and it runs through. You can though use just filter wool if you want to put in there to reduce any of the splash. So that's the reason I have the sponge in there, and also it removes any of the big particles before it gets down to the sump section. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move over to the table, and I'm just going to work through some of the construction items that I've used in this particular setup. Before I move over to the table to do the construction, if you have a solid side, so if your bookshelf is solid on the ends, what I would recommend is that you do the tray first, You do the connections, you line it up against the solid piece of wood, mark it off, and then drill a hole through with a hole saw for the pipe to go through. Or you can measure from the outside, but it's probably easier if you do it from the inside. The other thing you can do is, if you don't want to have central heating, as in heating in the sump, which in this case makes a lot of sense, you could, if you wanted to, route it and put heat cables down. But because all the water is connected in the system and we have the sump at the bottom, it doesn't make sense to do something like that. It will work a lot better just putting a heater in the sump. If you have the same scenario as what I had, where you want to put something on the top shelf, but there's no top to the shelf, in other words, there's no solid at the top or up there, you can do what I've done. You take the pipe all the way up, you put in a bend, you bring it across, you bring it down on the other side, and then you just clamp it in place or hold it in place with a clamp. In that way it creates a bit of a solid structure, and then you can use the same method that you use on all the other shelves on that particular one. Okay, let's go to the table. Okay, so let's have some fun. I want to run you through the construction and how I've done it, and how to create the back chambers for the water flow and that kind of thing. First of all, the container is this particular container from Kmart. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, and it's the liter container. Dimensions are 20 high by 10 by 10. Now the other thing that you'll notice on mine, I also drill a hole in the top. And the reason for that is there's two reasons. One is that it keeps the return pipe in place, so in case it bends or does something silly, it's not going to spray water all over the place. The other thing is bettas have the tendency to jump occasionally, and that's to prevent them from jumping. So that's the container, Kmart, a liter container. Then for the returns so you've got the black poly pipe, and then from the black poly pipe you've got these returns. Now you can buy, this is called a rigid riser, and that is what you can buy them in sets. The ones that I use, hope you can see that, is the 200mm rigid riser from Bunnings. You will have to cut this down to size. So for this build, the bookshelf size doesn't really matter. It's a question of whether you can put 3 containers, whether you could put 5, whether you can put 6 on a shelf. All you have to worry about is what is the weight capacity per shelf. So if your shelf can hold 20 kilos, then you could probably put 10 of these quite safely, because there's only a liter of water in each one. So it's only a kilo. You will adjust the length of the riser from the poly pipe. Now you can get these risers in 300mm as well, so 30 centimeters. I use the 200mm, the 20 centimeter one, and I cut it to size. And that then effectively fits in to the poly pipe. All right, what you're going to also need is you need the bends. You need something to glue the fitting into this plastic tray. I use a particular glue that I use for acrylic, and it's called Acryfix. I don't know if that's going to show clearly. Okay, and it's Acryfix, and it's 1R0192, and it goes hard, it goes like plastic, and that's what I use for gluing into the tray, and also what I use for gluing into the container. Now, what is a little bit pricey are these little adapters, so you can just see what those look like, hopefully. And the reason I use these and just don't go straight in with a piece of PVC pipe is that it's got a bit of an edge or lip. So it allows me to put glue on there, and when it goes through, it's secure. The containers that I use, again, these come from Kmart, and they're called clear drawer, medium and narrow. this is a 30 centimeter one. On my shelf, on my rack, I'm using the 40 centimeter one. You know, if you need to, you can join two of them. You know, use an adapter on each side, piece of pipe in between, and you can make it as long as you want. All right, so let's just see if that. There we go. So that is the tray that I use that the water flows back into. And effectively what you want is you want a system. On it you will have a right, you'll have a left, and then you have all the ones in between. So you have one on one side, you have one on the other side, like that, and then you have the center ones. And depending on how long you make your, how long the tray is, or how many trays you use on a shelf, you can have as many of these. Now, the end ones bend in, and the reason I bend them in is because the tray that I'm using is the 40 centimeter one. I didn't want to add more to it. So the outlet pipe, you can make this a different length and you can bend it a different angle. And that allows you then to space it out even more and allows you more space. So it's the tray, that's the one that gets the sponge. That's what collects the water. From there, the water goes to the white PVC that I've shown you. And that then is the return back to the sump. Excuse me. Okay, so let's talk about how we create these. Let's just move these out of the way for a second. Now, let's talk about the return. So the return is just, again, it's just a black 19mm irrigation pipe or poly pipe. What you then do is once you've, and what I would do in my case, what I did is, and I recommend, is that you put in the poly pipe first. So that's the return from the sump pump. You put that in as you require, and you then put your plastic containers, these containers underneath, and you determine how many you're going to have and therefore how many outlets you need on it. What I do is I just use the scissors. I make a really small hole, just with the point of the scissors, this tiny hole, and then into that goes the rigid riser. Okay. All right. And remember, at the end you'll have your same as what I've spoken about before. You have your end plugs. You know, you'll have your bends at the end. You'll have your T-piece for your next shelf, T-piece for next shelf, and it goes down to your sump pump that is pumping the water. Right. So you'll have that. You'll measure it. You know, if it's quite high up, you'll then, you know, have longer ones. Now, at that point, what I then do is I then add in the 4mm threaded inline tap, the ones that I always complain about being so expensive. Okay, again from Bunnings. Right, and that then turns into the riser. I will add though, with these risers, don't try and cut it with a scissors, rather use a saw, a little hand saw, and just saw to length. It's a really hard plastic, and when you cut with the scissors, it's got a tendency to almost crimp it, which is not ideal. Right, so you've got the tap, and then at the end of the tap, you put on the other piece. Okay, right, you screw that in nice and tight, and then that effectively is done, and just in the hole itself, so that if this is flexible and it moves, well, it can't move outside of the hole. And then you've got your regulator tap. Excuse me. So that is what you're doing for the return, and this you would have for every container. You would have one of these. All right, so let's get that out of the way. So that's for the return. The container itself, really quite straightforward. I use, again, If I can see where I've put it, there we go. A 20mm oven. And you've seen me use these before on the Madden filters. Okay. Apologize for the noise. You decide where you want it. And again, it's one of those things where don't use too much force, let the drill do the work. And if you're leaving the lids on, you want it slightly down from the top so it's not too close to the top. Okay, ideally you wouldn't be sitting doing this, so just, you know, safety, be careful. You know, you'd be working on a table. All right, and there is the hole drilled. I don't know if that's clear. Yeah, we can see the hole. Okay, and that's the 20mm bit that I used. And just again, that's what it looks like. Okay, into that. Now, what you'll notice is a lot of the time, it's actually quite tight. Be careful how much force you use because you don't want to crack this. All right, I normally just give it a good twist. And what you want to make sure is that it's nice and flush against the plastic. Now, if you find that it's just too tight, what you can do is, I like to, you know, so that it almost turns in. Just take a bit of sandpaper, coarse sandpaper, and sand the thread on this, and that'll make it easier to fit in. All right, so that's for that one. Sand the inside of the hole as well if you want to, but you want that going in there. Apologize for the noise. Okay, there we go. That's absolutely flush, and that's what you want. The nice thing is now, I don't know if you can see it in there, you get a bit of a rim around the edge, which means you've got place for your glue to sit. Okay, so, and it almost turns out. All right, so that's what you do with that one. The same process for the top. Use the same piece, same bit. Decide where the center point is and just measure that corner to corner. Wherever the top part is. Let me not show bad safety. Okay, and again, let the drill do the work for you. Right, let's get rid of this. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so that is your container. From a fitting point of view, remember that's going to go in. Okay, perfect. The lid can still go on. From there, you're going to go to a piece of pipe, then to a T-piece, and then another piece of PVC from that, depending how you want it. Now you can see on the ones that I use, the pipe coming through from that adapter. You can see I've hardly used any pipe. There's a real small piece of pipe in there that just connects the adapter. This adapter here, let me just turn it out. Okay, so that adapter that's in there, small piece of pipe in between, and that then connects it. And you can just get PVC weld at Bunnings. You don't have to get the high pressure one. It's blue in, the one that I use is blue in color. It's not expensive. But only do the welding and the final gluing of everything once you're 100% satisfied that you've got the right angles, that it is working well with your tray, etc., and then go ahead and glue it. All right, so that takes care of how to do the containers. Now, for the tray, it's actually quite a, I don't want to say brittle plastic, but what I find is probably need to be a little bit gentler with this one. What I do again is And this comes down to how much water do you want in the bottom for the outlet. So I tend to go about midpoint on this container. Okay, so again, let the drill do the work. And it may take a while for it to get going. And again, you know, ideally you're not doing this the way I'm showing it here. You've got it sturdy, you've got, you know, a nice clear space. Safety first, you don't want to hit your hands or anything. But I'm just trying to show you how it's done. All right, so. Okay, let the bit do the work. I probably went a little bit quicker than what I should have. But, all right, and there you have the hole drilled in there. Now, what I did find with these containers, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but it actually is slightly angled, which means when this is in, let me just pop this one in. When it is in, it is slightly angled off to the right. So when you put it down level on your bookshelf and you now connect your piece of pipe to that, which is going to go to your T-piece, which is for your return water to run back to your sump, it's at an angle. And if your T-piece is not low enough, you'll have a tendency to pull this up. And what that does is it eventually pulls away the glue around here, around the bottom section, and you'll start getting leaking. So what you can do, and this is not, don't have to, but what I found works quite well is, and again, apologies for the noise, and just be very careful when you do this. You don't want to melt the plastic, so you don't want to burn it. You just want to warm it up slightly. So just use, if you've got access to a heat gun, I find this works very well. Let me just show you what I mean. And just keep rotating it around the hole, on the outside of the hole, should I say. And just go a little bit wider. And what you're doing is you're just softening that plastic in that area. Probably needed to do that a little bit longer. But what that does is, you can see, it's actually went in really easy. Now, what I can do is I can almost push it against, and that squares it up. So when it's dry, which is just about, you'll see, you probably can't see on the camera, but it's just slightly indented, but it's flush with the ends, and also it is now level. So 90 degrees. So when I put it down and I connect the pipe to it, I don't have a problem with it angling down. Now, you don't have to do that bit. It just means that when you get to your T-piece on your return flow of your white PVC, you need to consider that slight drop in angle and compensate for that in that T-piece. The other thing is, if you use the heat gun method that I just showed you to square it up, be very careful that you don't over straighten it so that it is too much up on the out, because then you will have the water not flowing easily. It'll have to fill up a lot more before the water starts flowing. Anyway, so that's another method. As I said, once you've got that, again, I glue that section in, but I do not glue the section in that goes into the T-piece in case I need to remove the tray for any reason. On the return pipe, which I showed you earlier, which is the white PVC down the right-hand side of the stand, make sure that you connect everything up, that all of it lines up, that you're comfortable and happy with it. Then go ahead and glue everything, with the exception of this connector into the T-piece in case you need to remove the tray. The other thing is for the T-piece, for the piping, whether it be the black poly pipe for the supply, or whether it be the white return, I use these again in the irrigation section at Bunnings. It's just irrigation clamps or brackets. It looks like that. And I just use that. Once I'm happy with location and everything's in place, I use this then to attach this to the frame. All right, so that's it from a build. Build is quite straightforward. It's really good fun, you know. So give it a try. Give it a try. Really, it's good fun. Now, when I was doing this, the downside, there was a downside, is what I didn't realize is that the method that I used internally, so putting this through that hole, that fitting, that worked great. Sorry, let me get the fitting out of there. So the fitting that goes in there, it worked really well, and once it's glued in, it's really great. The only thing is it's actually quite a big hole. Now, I found very quickly that not the males, but the female bettas, depending on how much you're dripping into the container, I had 2 betta females that took a journey down this tube. Now, in itself, that may not be a problem if you don't have sponge in this. If you've got sponge or filter wool, that is above the water line. So any fish that fall in here will not be in the water, and therefore, you know, they won't make it. I was fortunate because I come and check up on my fish quite often. I saw one of the fish wasn't in the containers, and I saw the female at the back. So to avoid that, my recommendation is that on the inside of the container, on this fitting that goes on the inside, either put a piece of mesh over it, or maybe a small piece of sponge in here to prevent it. The other thing is, it starts adding up when you start buying all these little fittings and all the T-pieces and so forth. The other option you can look at, and I haven't tried it yet, is that you can use something like 8mm clear vinyl tubing. Now again, I haven't tried it. I will give it a try, and then I'll post something up and see if it works. But my thinking is that you could drill a hole, put the pipe through, which will then be the overflow, and you shouldn't have to glue it, because if you make the hole just slightly smaller and you force the soft tubing through it, it shouldn't leak. It should create a watertight seal. The challenge with using this is you want this pipe, let me just cut off a piece. You want this pipe to go from the container, same as here, and you want it to end up in your tray. Now, the good thing about using rigid is where I put it is where it is. It's not moving. When I'm using soft, I just have to be aware, and of course you can size it, I just have to be aware that it's not rigid, and it may move. For whatever reason, it shouldn't. If you put the rigid pipe in, cut it down to size, you know, have it sitting against the back as I've got here, there's no reason why that couldn't work. So that's definitely a cheaper alternative if you're looking for another option other than using, what adds up after a while is using all this rigid PVC. I would recommend, if I was going to do it, and that's why I bought this roll to possibly test, is I would use 8mm. So this one is the 8mm tubing. I'll show you again. You get 5 meters on there, which is plenty. So that is an option. A piece like this, let's maybe just cut this one shorter. Okay. In there, and you know, that kind of thing, where it's against the back, so it can't go anywhere. So that would definitely be an option. If you're going to try this option, please post some comments and let me know how it goes. I would, if I was doing it, I'd drill the hole, I'd put the pipe through. You may have to, put in a bit of hot water so it's soft just to get it through, make sure it's nice and firm and tight. Then I would first make sure that I've got the right length, maybe at least halfway down the tray, and then I'd cut it off. But that's definitely an option and one that will save you a fair amount of money. All right, I'm just thinking if there's any other little bits and pieces I should let you know about. I think that's about it, guys. Again, containers, Kmart, tray, Kmart, all the fittings, Bunnings, bits, the whole size 20 mil. It's an Irwin, Bunnings. If you want to use a heat gun just to soften up the side, to square it off slightly. Other than that, really, have fun, try different things. The advantage of this is that you've got the collective of the water. You've got 20 containers, not quite a litre in each one, but it's 800 mils in each one. So what's that, 16 litres or whatever that is. You've got your sump, and your sump has another 20, 30 litres in it. Your filter material in there. So you've got a good biofilter in there. You can put one heater in that heats up everything. The downside, of course, is if you get a fish that's sick, you run the risk that can be transmitted to everybody else. But because you're using taps on each one, nothing stops you if you identify something you're not happy with the way a fish looks and you'd like to possibly treat just that one. You switch off the tap. You can then medicate just in the one container. Do water changes just on that one container with a little siphon tube. And then wait until you're comfortable that that fish is looking good. And then you can switch on the tap again and have it added to the whole system. The same as if you get new bettas in. You've got a couple of these spare, maybe 4 or 5, you get 3 more bettas. Put them in the little containers, put a little bit of almond leaf or something in the bottom. Make sure you're comfortable. Don't switch the taps on, run all the other taps, run the rest of the system as per normal. Once you're comfortable that they look good, you've quarantined them, go ahead and switch on the tap. So from that point of view, it's a really good system and it really works well. The other thing that I wanted to just add, and let me just grab a pump, and I just want to run you through some of the considerations on what size pump you should use in relation to the size of the rack, because that's one that caught me out in the beginning. So give me a second, I'll grab a pump and then we'll have a quick chat. Okay, let's talk about the pump required in the sump to pump the water back to effectively 20, in my case, 20 little containers. Now, there's a couple of challenges here in that what I've found is that you can use a pump with more or less the head height that you're pushing at. So for those that aren't clear, head height is referred to as what is the maximum height the pump can push water. But it's a curve. So what happens is the higher it has to push water, the less the output. Right, so when you buy a pump and it says 3,000 litres per hour, that's normally at a 0 head height. So if you put that pump in a bucket of water, you switched it on and you measure how much is coming out of it, that is the number 3,000 litres per hour. As soon as you start going up, because there's the pressure, the pressure in the pipes, any bends or anything, that all affects the efficiency of that pump to reach that head height and how much water. Now, when I first did it, with the first pump I used, and I've got this, I can give you some of the details, I've got it here in front of me. The first pump I used, I went with a head height that was just a little bit higher than the stand. The challenge with that was that when there was a power failure, or I switched it off and then switched it back on, the bottom layers or the bottom rows, the water would pump adequately and come back through all the returns. But the top one, it wasn't pushing hard enough to get the water out through the top one. And what I needed to do was close all the taps on the bottom shelves. That would force the water to go through the top ones. And once that was running adequately, I could open the rest. But that's a pain. So the one that I'm currently running there, and I'm just going to give you its details. It's a cheap pump. It's a Aquasonic Evo. It has a maximum head height of 3 meters and it does 3,000 liters an hour. Now, that stand is about 1.8, and then on top of that you've probably got another 40 centimeters for the top section that goes across the top. So you're probably looking at 2.2 meters. I would say you don't want to go less than about 2.7 head height. So when you buy a pump, you want about 2.7 or to 3. A little bit more than 3 is also fine. The liters per hour to me is not such a big issue because you don't have a lot of water that you want to turn around in that system. So at those kind of head heights, you're probably going to get pumps that are 3,000 liters per hour, maybe a little bit more. Now my backup, because I like to make sure that I have a backup in case something happens to that existing pump. The backup that I've got is the Aqua One Maxi. Now I haven't used this particular one and tested it, but after I bought it, I realized that I may be pushing my luck with this one. It's a 2,200 liter per hour pump, but it only has a maximum head height of 2.5 meters. Now the model up from this, the 106, has got 3,200 liters an hour and it's got a head height of 3.5 meters. That is probably the one that I should have gone with. But like I say, I'm using a really cheap brand in there. It's probably not that efficient. The Aqua One is probably a more efficient, better constructed pump. So it may be okay. My recommendation though is, if the top section is where your water's coming out, so in my case we said about 2.2, I'd probably go up to 3 meters. If yours is 2.5, I'd probably go 3.2 meters or something like that. What you have to be careful of, and the one view is, it's probably better to have more than have the problem where it's not getting up there. What you have to be careful of is if you have too much pressure. So let's say you went with a 6,000 liter per hour pump that can do a head height of 5 meters. Although you're turning all the taps close so that you have a drip system or a very slow flow, you're putting an extreme amount of pressure in that pipe. Now, what will happen at some stage is you more than likely will find dripping start happening where the riser goes into the black poly pipe. Even bigger risk is that there's so much pressure that one of those that maybe was not tightened adequately comes out and then just, pumps water out of that, and that could create a bit of a disaster for you. What I do with a higher volume pump, so like as in the one that I've got there, it's quite a high volume pump, but it works perfectly for what I'm doing. On the bottom shelf, so where these are right at the bottom, any one that doesn't have any fish in, or any bettas in, I make sure that I have the tap open full so that it can push water into these at maximum rate where there's no fish in it. And only once I add fish do I then turn it down. It's almost like having a bit of a release valve. So my recommendation would be, if you're using one that's a little bit more powerful and you've tested it, you switch off, you switch back on and it all comes on nicely and pumps adequately, is choose 1 or 2 of your containers on your bottom shelf and have those taps on full. The other option is that you run from your poly pipe, the riser that I showed you, you run just thinner irrigation pipe, or you run some airline tubing and just make sure that it's securely attached. You run that back from the poly back to your sump, and you just have that tap on full open all the time, which will then release some of the pressure in the pump. It'll give you better life on your pump, and it will also reduce some of the risk that you may have on some of the, something leaking. So that's around pumps. Guys, I think that's about it. If you have any questions, just pop them in the comments and I'll try and answer as best you can. Other than that, happy Betta Rack building. Go out tomorrow. Tomorrow's Monday, public holiday here. Easter weekend, go out, go buy some containers, set up a rack. You know, initially you only want 5, set up 5, have some fun, try it out. The other thing is, you know, it doesn't have to be this size plastic container. If you want to go with a bigger container, go with a bigger container. What I'm showing you is the concept and the method that I've used to do it. But if you want to go and, you know, use something that's 3 times the size, or you just want to have 2 on a shelf, but you want to use that same kind of system, and it's plastic, it's a nice clear hard plastic, you can drill it, go for it. Just, you know, have some fun, play around with some, you know, some of these things, get the tools out, drill a hole or 2, and you know, build something that you know, that works for you and that you're proud of, and you know, does what you need, and you can have a, you know, because we have limited space, you know, many of you have, I have limited space, and it's how do I keep what I want or have a selection to choose from when I'm breeding, without having to have a mass amount of tanks all over the place. So have fun, guys, go build a Betta Rack, until the next video, and the next one is going to be on, probably going to do a quick short one on microworm cultures, what works for me, and then I'm going to do one on Betta breeding and what has worked for me on breeding the Bettas. Stay safe, enjoy, speak to you soon.